Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of sources, strip away the noise, and extract the most important insights for you, our listener. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the extraordinary life and work of Isabel Allende.
And this is a big one. We're not just talking about a globally celebrated novelist. We are looking at a life that serves as this visceral connection to the 20th century's most tumultuous political dramas in Latin America.
Absolutely. Allende is a figure whose personal narrative, we're talking exile, family upheaval, profound loss. It's completely inextricable from her fiction.
You can't separate them.
Okay, so let's unpack this for you. Our sources present this deeply layered character, a Chilean-American writer, a seminal practitioner of magical realism, and the recipient of both the Chilean National Literature Prize and the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Huge accolades.
Huge. But here's the hook that I think defines her early spirit. Long before she became, the world's most widely read Spanish-language author, she was fired from a translation job.
And the reason is just. It's perfect. It reveals everything, doesn't it?
It really does.
She was translating English romance novels into Spanish.
Yeah.
And, well, she just couldn't resist altering the material. She started making these unauthorized changes to the dialogue and the endings.
Why, though? What was she changing?
She felt compelled to make the heroine sound, and this is a quote, more intelligent. And she wanted to grant them greater independence than the original Cinderella-style conclusions allowed.
That seemingly small, almost humorous act of defiance, it feels like the core theme of her entire career.
Exactly.
It's the writer as a subversive force, right?
Yeah.
Challenging the patriarchal assumptions baked into popular culture, even in the most formulaic genre imaginable.
Precisely. And that spirit of defiance, that impulse toward liberation, that informs our entire mission for you today. We're going to trace the full arc from her highly privileged yet intensely nomadic diplomatic childhood to her extensive pre-novel career in journalism and television. And crucially, we will dissect the definitive traumatic circumstances of the 1973 coup that forced her into exile.
An exile that paradoxically catalyzed her entire career as a novelist.
The very thing that made her. We also have to give serious attention to her writing rituals. The strict, almost ritualistic discipline that underpins these fantastical narratives.
And that all culminates in the birth of the House of the Spirits.
Yes, and we absolutely must tackle the most fascinating paradox of her legacy.
The disconnect.
The massive disconnect between her phenomenal commercial success, we're talking 77 million copies sold globally, and the remarkably harsh, almost venomous criticism she has faced from certain intellectual and literary circles, particularly in her home country of Chile.
That's the question, isn't it? What does that division tell us about the relationship between high art and popular appeal? It's central to understanding modern literature, and we will drill down on it.
For sure.
But first, let's just firmly establish her achievements. She holds dual Chilean and U.S. citizenship, and beyond the sales figures, her recognition is just undeniable, culminating in the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2014, recognizing her profound impact on literature and global culture.
A true global figure.
So to understand the scope of her imagination, you really have to understand the sheer mobility and the intensity of her roots. Isabel Angelica Allende Yona was born in Lima, Peru in 1942.
But she was born into this specific family nexus that, well, it pretty much ensures she would never have a quiet life.
And it all comes down to that last name, Allende.
That family name, Allende, is arguably the most politically charged name in modern Chilean history. Her father, Tomás Allende, was a diplomat, the second secretary at the Chilean embassy in Lima.
Okay, so that explains the Peru birth.
Exactly. But the link that truly matters, the one that defines her life, is that Tomás was a first cousin of Salvador Allende.
The future and historically crucial democratically elected socialist president of Chile?
The very same. He served from 1970 to 1973, and that connection is the key to unlocking her fate.
It placed her directly adjacent to the highest corridors of power, which, would later expose her to catastrophic danger.
Absolutely. But even before the politics intervened in such a violent way, her immediate family structure was already fracturing.
Right. The sources mention her father left quite early on.
Yes. In 1945, when Isabel was just 3 years old, her father left the family. So her mother, Francisca Yona Barros, who was universally known as Doña Panchita, she relocated Isabel and her two siblings back to Santiago, Chile.
So right there, at age 3, you have this sense of instability, this split, even within a privileged background.
It's the first displacement, but certainly not the last. And the source material details how quickly her life shifted again into this demanding, fluid existence of a diplomatic family.
That's when her mother remarried.
That's right. Her mother remarried another diplomat, a man named Ramon Huidobro. And this marriage, it just kicked off what the sources rightly refer to as the nomad years.
The nomad years.
From 1953 to 1958, her stepfather's postings required constant movement. It forced Isabel to adapt to entirely new cultures, new languages, new education systems again and again.
And these aren't just similar environments. We're talking about attending an American private school in La Paz, Bolivia.
A hugely different cultural context.
And then a move to Beirut, Lebanon, where she attended an English private school.
Just think about the sensory immersion that constant movement required of a young person. To thrive, she had to become an expert observer of human behavior, of dialect, of social norms.
It's the perfect, if unintentional, training for a novelist.
It's exactly that. She was absorbing the rhythms of Latin American society and the rigidity of British colonial education, at the same time. This constant displacement likely helped forge her unique literary voice, which so often juxtaposes the intensely local with the grandly international.
And the magical with the painfully pragmatic.
That's the one.
So when she finally returned to Chile in 1958, there was a period of homeschooling. And this is when she really gets to dive into literature. The sources specifically cite William Shakespeare as a foundational influence.
Shakespeare is so fascinating in this context. I mean, his work is characterized by these sprawling family sagas, political intrigue, grand universal emotional themes.
All the elements that define the House of the Spirits.
Exactly. She wasn't reading simple narratives. She was reading stories about kings and coups and the intimate tragedies that result from public power struggles. It's all there.
But before that literary genius fully emerged, she took an unexpected turn into international bureaucracy of all things.
Right. She spent several years, from 1959 to 1965, working with the UN Food and Agriculture Organization.
In Santiago, Brussels, all over Europe.
That's 6 years in this highly structured, objective world of international policy and development. It's such a striking contrast to the emotional, fantastical world she would eventually create.
But it must have given her an understanding of global systems and maybe, more importantly, the rigorous, structured work ethic she would later apply to writing novels.
No doubt. And then we arrive at the pivotal moment. The humorous but incredibly revealing anecdote, the romance novel scandal.
I love this story. It's so crucial because it shows us the nascent rebel before any political necessity arose.
It's biographical gold. So back in Chile, she takes on this job translating English romance novels into Spanish. This was essentially factory line work, it demanded fidelity to the source text.
And these were your typical Cinderella-style narratives, right, built on the premise of female passivity and the pursuit of a dominant male figure.
The absolute formula. But she just couldn't do it. She couldn't abide by the formula. She began making unauthorized changes to the dialogue and, significantly, to the entire direction of the plot.
And the sources say she was fired specifically for 2 reasons.
Yes. First, she was altering the text to make the heroines sound more intelligent than the original authors intended.
And second,
she was changing the endings. Instead of the conventional marriage conclusion, she was giving them independence, allowing them to find more independence and do good in the world.
Wait. So she was fired for making her female characters smart and functional.
Pretty much.
That's a massive statement about the genre and, the prevailing social expectations of women at the time. Did the source material suggest she saw this as some kind of revolutionary act?
It seems less like a calculated revolutionary act, more like an instinctive moral necessity. She just couldn't bring herself to perpetuate the stereotype, even in work for higher translation.
So this instinctual resistance to female subjugation, it's the thread that runs from this low-stakes translation job right up to the philanthropic mission of her foundation decades later.
She was fighting the patriarchy one cheap paperback at a time.
I love that framing. And this instinctive intelligence, having been rejected by the romance novel industry, it immediately found its proper home in the vibrant world of Chilean journalism.
Her journalistic career before the coup was extensive and multifaceted. Starting in 1967, she was part of the editorial staff of Paula magazine, but she truly dove into the work from 1969 to 1974, working for and eventually editing the popular children's magazine Mampato.
So she was writing for multiple audiences across different genres all at the same time, including children's stories like La Huila Panchita and Lauches y Lachones. It shows her ability to capture diverse voices.
And she also channeled her satirical energy into a regular column, which she later collected into her first published book, Civilize a su Troglodita.
Which literally translates to civilize your caveman.
The title alone tells you everything, doesn't it? Her focus was on dissecting and often mocking traditional male behavior and patriarchal norms.
And she wasn't just writing, she was a visible figure deeply embedded in the Chilean media landscape. She worked in television production for Channels 7 and 13 between 1970 and 1974. She was a working, known public intellectual in Santiago.
This extensive media background is so crucial. It gave her the discipline of meeting deadlines, the ability to write clearly and engagingly for a mass audience, and the confidence to express strong, often contrarian opinions publicly.
It's all groundwork. It prepared her for the rigor required to write a novel, even if she didn't know it yet.
Right, and this path leads us directly to the moment of the prophecy. While working as a journalist, she sought an interview with Chile's revered poet, the Nobel laureate, Pablo Neruda.
A towering figure in Chilean letters.
The towering figure. And Neruda didn't just dismiss her, he recognized this latent creative energy that lay just beneath her journalistic facade. When she met him, he explicitly advised her that she had too much imagination to be a journalist, and that her destiny lay in fiction.
That's incredible validation, but it's also a profound redirection. It's not just a compliment, it's a firm push away from facts and toward fantasy.
He encouraged her to take her existing work, her satirical columns, and compile them into a book.
So he essentially validated her impulse to tell stories that transcended mere reporting. And Civilis a su Troglodita became the tangible result of that advice.
It did. But what's so chilling is the timing. This prophetic advice to turn away from the brutal facts of the world. It came just months before the political reality of Chile became too dangerous for any journalist or any citizen to ignore.
The storm was gathering.
And her entire life was about to be forcibly reset.
The stage is set for the definitive rupture. Everything she had learned about the world, about stability, about literature, was about to be tested by political violence.
The transition from successful journalist to exiled novelist begins violently in September 1973. The military coup d'etat, led by General Augusto Pinochet, overthrew and led to the death of her cousin, President Salvador Allende. This was a moment of profound national trauma, and for Isabel, a total annihilation of her life as she knew it.
This isn't just news from afar. This is a direct, intimate, life-threatening crisis, all because of her familial and political connections. The sources make it clear she was in immediate danger.
Her connection to the deposed president was personal. She was close to him, and her socialist sympathies were well known through her public journalism. The Pinochet regime immediately began widespread purges of perceived political opponents.
And those with connections to the Allende government were prime targets.
Prime targets. And the sources detail her involvement in actively resisting the junta, or at least in humanitarian rescue efforts. She risked her life arranging safe passage for people on the junta's wanted lists.
That phrase, arranging safe passage, it really minimizes the danger, doesn't it?
It does. She was dealing with clandestine networks, risking execution or disappearance by helping dissidents flee the country. She was deeply committed to the resistance until the threat moved too close to home.
And that line was crossed when her own family was targeted.
Yes, her mother and stepfather narrowly escaped assassination. Once that happened, and the knowledge spread that Isabel herself had been added to the wanted list and was receiving direct death threats, well, her position in Chile became completely untenable.
The time for resistance had ended. The time for survival had begun.
Exactly. So in 1975, she fled Chile. Her destination was Venezuela, where she would remain for 13 formative years.
13 years? That's more than a decade. That's enough time to shed one identity and build another completely from scratch.
And that's exactly what she believes happened. Allende has reflected that this involuntary departure was, paradoxically, the very catalyst that made her a serious writer.
How so?
She stated that staying in Chile would have meant being trapped in the chores, in the family, in the person that people expected me to be.
So the dictatorship, by forcing her out, inadvertently liberated her from the societal constraints of the Chilean patriarchy. That is a profound irony.
It is. She felt that the domestic expectations, the need to conform to the role of a wife and mother in a traditional society, would have just crushed her creative voice. Exile gave her the necessary distance, geographical and emotional, to look back at the chaos, the history, and the gender depression, and synthesize it all into fiction.
The trauma provided the material, the distance provided the lens.
Perfectly put. Though while in Caracas, she still had to make a living. She had to maintain that journalistic discipline she'd honed back home.
Right, this wasn't some kind of bohemian retreat.
Not at all. She continued freelance journalism, working for El Nacional from 1976 to 1983. And showing the pragmatic side of her personality, she took on administrative work, serving as an administrator of the Morocco School from 1979 to 1983. It was a practical life dictated by financial necessity, far from the artistic circles of Santiago.
Which brings us to 1981, the moment of genesis. The moment the journalist became the novelist. This is the story of the letter that became a legend.
And this anecdote, it just highlights the deeply personal nature of her breakthrough. In 1981, she received the devastating news that her beloved 99-year-old grandfather was dying.
99, wow.
Yeah. She was in Caracas, unable to travel to him in time, so she sat down to write.
An anguished attempt to connect one last time, to use the power of the written word to transcend reality.
She intended the letter to keep him alive, at least in spirit. And this immense emotional charge transformed a simple letter into the foundation of her debut novel, The House of the Spirits.
So the act of writing became an act of preservation.
Both of her grandfather's memory and, by extension, the memory of the Chile she had lost. She later described the novel's intention explicitly to exorcise the ghosts of the Pinochet dictatorship.
What's fascinating is that the book uses magical realism to achieve that exorcism. For those who might be unfamiliar with the style, can you boil it down for us? Why was it the perfect vehicle for this political grief?
Well, magical realism isn't fantasy in the way we usually think of it. It's the seamless integration of extraordinary or, fantastical elements into an otherwise realistic narrative setting.
So it's treating the miraculous as mundane.
Exactly. In the context of the House of the Spirits, it allows Allende to speak about the unspeakable historical trauma of the dictatorship through metaphor. For example, a character's hair might turn green or objects might move on their own, and these things are just accepted facts within the narrative.
So it heightens the emotional and political reality rather than escaping it?
Precisely. It gave her the necessary distance and metaphorical language to critique a dictatorship that suppressed factual reporting.
But despite this powerful, immediate narrative, the book initially faced a tough reception from publishers.
It did, yes. It was rejected by numerous Latin American publishers because they didn't understand this new voice or felt she was too much of a journalist to write serious fiction.
But it finally found a home.
It finally found a home and was published in Barcelona, Spain. And the success was just explosive and immediate. It quickly ran to over 24 Spanish editions and was translated into a score of languages.
And instantly, she was compared to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the literary heavyweight of the Latin American boom. That put her on the world stage right away.
She was a sensation. But as we transition to discussing her routine, we have to look past the magical elements and acknowledge the strict, almost brutal work discipline that made that sensation possible.
We've seen this mentioned repeatedly as her strict writing discipline. If the creation was emotional, the process sounds like pure industrial rigor.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
This is the journalist discipline applied to the novelist's task. The sources detail her ritualistic routine. She writes on a computer, Monday to Saturday, from 9:00 a.m. to 7:00 p.m.
Wait, a 10-hour workday, 6 days a week? That schedule, that relentless output, it sounds less like a magical realist communing with the spirits and more like an industrial writer.
I see your point.
Doesn't that routine, the sheer volume it implies, doesn't it lend some credence to the later critique from people like Roberto Bolaño, who called her a writing machine?
That's a sharp observation. And the sheer structure of her output is exactly what her critics would later seize upon. They argue that true artistic creation can't be dictated by the clock.
But what's her take on it?
Allende argues that this discipline is precisely what enables her imagination. It removes the stress of waiting for inspiration. It turns writing into a habit, ensuring the story gets told, regardless of the muse. It's the absolute antithesis of the tortured romantic novelist stereotype.
And there's one detail, an almost superstitious tradition, that anchors her entire career back to that first moment of necessity in 1981.
The famous January 8th rule. She always starts a new book on January 8th. This is not arbitrary. It's the tradition she began in 1981 when she started writing that letter to her grandfather.
So it binds every single work she has ever written back to that foundational traumatic act of separation and creation.
It's the anniversary of her self-actualization as a novelist. It suggests that every story she tells is, on some level, an attempt to recreate the emotional intensity and necessity of that first letter, It's a remarkable fusion of trauma, ritual, and success.
So, as we dive deeper into her massive literary success, we need to clarify her position in the literary world. Her style is a composite, drawing heavily from magical realism, as we discussed, but also incorporating elements of post-boom literature.
Right, and since you mentioned the comparison to Garcia Marquez, who is the icon of the Latin American boom, let's delineate what post-boom literature means and why Allende is often categorized there.
Okay, good idea.
The boom era, which was roughly the 1960s, was characterized by literary experimentation, complex narrative structures, and high intellectual rigor. Writers like Garcia Marquez and Julio Cortázar.
Right, often very challenging reads.
Very. Post-boom literature, which emerged in the 70s and 80s, maintained that political commitment, but often prioritized narrative accessibility, a faster pace, and a focus on historical and geopolitical realities. Allende fits this because while she uses fantastical elements, her core narratives are very linear, highly readable, and driven by explicit historical context.
Which made her instantly accessible to a global audience.
Instantly. And the size of that audience is what fundamentally defines her legacy, and, ironically, fuel the criticism against her. Let's restate the scale of her success, because the numbers are genuinely staggering.
They really are.
Her novels have been translated into more than 42 languages and have sold over 77 million copies worldwide.
77 million.
This makes her, indisputably, the world's most widely read Spanish-language author. She is not just popular. She is a cultural phenomenon that rivals any literary figure of the last half-century.
And this success is sustained. We're talking about massive work spanning decades, from the early successes like Of Love and Shadows and Eva Luna to explorations of historical figures like Zorro, and major recent novels like Violetta and the forthcoming My Name is Emilia del Valle.
Her global recognition mirrors this scale. She's been named a literary legend, was named the third most influential Latino leader in the world in 2007, and was lauded by outlets like the Los Angeles Times as a genius.
And she's received major cultural accolades, including the prestigious Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize for contributing to the beauty of the world. The professional world recognizes her as a giant.
Unquestionably.
That is the high praise. But we must now pivot to the fierce counter-narrative, the intellectual disdain that really haunts her career. This is where the world of commerce clashes violently with the world of academic rigor.
And this internal literary debate is intense. The critique, if you boil it down, is essentially this. Her writing is too accessible, too emotional, and too popular to be truly rigorous or complex art.
And the primary voice of this condemnation was, ironically, another Chilean master novelist, Roberto Bolaño.
His comments are legendary for their brutality and their precision. He didn't just dislike her work, he sought to disqualify it entirely.
He was vicious.
He was.
Well,
Bolaño famously called her literature anemic, suggesting it lacked vital strength, comparing it to a person on his deathbed. He went straight for the heart of her methodology, calling her a writing machine, not a writer, and dismissively referred to her as a hack.
wow, anemic, a writing machine. Hack. That's not just criticism, that's a total dismissal of her artistic legitimacy. It suggests that her 10-hour, 6-day-a-week schedule is evidence of a failure of art, not a dedication to craft.
Exactly. Bolaño valued literature that was dangerous, challenging, difficult. For him, mass appeal diluted the necessary artistic tension. Her commercial success was, for him, the evidence of her failure.
And a similar, though maybe less vicious, critique came from the influential American critic Harold Bloom.
Yes, Bloom asserted that Allende only reflects a determinate period and that afterwards everybody will have forgotten her.
So that's a critique of temporal relevance. He's arguing she's just a popular figure of the moment, lacking the timeless structural complexity required to enter the permanent Western literary canon.
Right, she offers pleasure and reflection, but not the enduring, challenging artistic truth that Bloom champions.
And the novelist Gonzalo Contreras, he really crystallized the entire debate in one quote. He stated that Allende committed a grave error to confuse commercial success with literary quality.
And this is the core philosophical battle. Can something be both high quality and immensely popular? These critics argue no. They believe that true literary value requires effort, demands ambiguity, and should resist easy consumption.
So they see her success, her ability to reach 77 million readers, as proof that she has pandered to the lowest common denominator, prioritizing melodrama over rigorous craft.
That's the argument.
This must be incredibly difficult to deal with, especially when so much of the criticism comes from intellectual figures in her own homeland. How has Allende confronted this duality?
Oh, she is completely aware of the disdain. She has publicly noted that she rarely receives good reviews in Chile, and that Chilean intellectuals specifically detest her.
But her rebuttal is powerful. She seems to champion the reader and reframe the meaning of quality.
She does. She directly contests the notion that high sales automatically means superficial writing, calling that assumption a great insult to the readership. She argues that readers are intelligent and demanding, and her global connection stems from the universality and emotional truth of her themes that directly address political oppression and female liberation.
So she's basically saying, who are you to tell 77 million people their taste is bad?
In essence, yes. She highlights the absurdity of the literary snobbery she faces, recalling how one professor attacked her simply for selling a lot of books, and she called that reaction unforgivable.
So the deep dive here is that Allende's career forces us to question the gatekeepers of literature. Is the measure of quality, intricacy, and obscurity, or emotional resonance and global impact? She sits firmly in the camp that believes reaching and moving millions with stories of political trauma and empowerment is a profound artistic achievement, regardless of what the critics think.
For all the external battles, the political escape, the critics' war, the greatest challenge and defining tragedy of Isabel Allende's life was intensely personal. It was a devastating loss that led her to step away from fiction and embrace memoir.
This tragic turn occurred in 1991. Her daughter, Paula Allende, who was born in 1963, suffered severe brain damage due to a horrific medication error.
The result was a persistent vegetative state. Allende spent months engaged in this agonizing bedside vigil, a period of profound helplessness and grief. After learning the extent of the medical mishap that caused the damage, she arranged to move Paula to her home in California.
And tragically, Paula died in December 1992 at the age of just 29.
Just 29. And that period of grief and the subsequent loss directly informed her most intimate and raw piece of work, the memoir Paula, which was published in 1995.
The structure of that book is unique, isn't it? It was written as an anguished, therapeutic letter to her deceased daughter.
That's right. It's a dual narrative. The immediate, painful description of the hospital vigil is intertwined with an extensive recounting of Allende's own life, including her childhood in Santiago and the formative years in exile. Writing it was clearly her mechanism for processing unimaginable trauma, weaving it into her own foundational history.
This memoir marked a shift. It suggests a deeper comfort with integrating her biographical truth directly into her published work. She later returned to the memoir format with The Sum of Our Days in 2008.
And that later memoir focused on the stability she had found in California. By this time, she had settled into her life with her second husband, William C. Gordon, and she focused on the proximity of her grown son, Nicholas, and her grandchildren. It was a conscious effort to document the domestic contentment she had earned after decades of upheaval.
This stability reflects such a change in environment from the diplomatic movement of her youth. She has resided in California since 1989 and gained U.S. citizenship in 1993, yet she fiercely maintains her cultural identity.
Oh, fiercely. She may live in San Rafael, California, with the core of her extended family close by, but she insists she feels deeply Chilean in the way of living, of being. And she embraces the cultural characteristics she sees in herself.
I remember that quote. It's wonderfully self-aware. She humorously defined that Chilean way as being bossy, messy, dominant, intrusive, hospitable, tribal.
It's an embrace of complexity and passion, far from the polished image of a global literary icon. It speaks volumes about her ability to hold two identities simultaneously: the disciplined American writer who operates on a strict schedule, and the passionate Chilean matriarch who defined herself by her family and her culture.
And this successful rootedness allowed her to create perhaps her most powerful legacy outside of literature, the Isabel Allende Foundation. This was established directly in response to Paula's life and death.
The foundation was created on December 9, 1996, and it essentially translates the themes of her fiction liberation, resistance to oppression, into real-world action.
Specifically, what is the foundation's mission and how does it connect to her daughter?
Its mission is, and this is from them, dedicated to supporting programs that promote and preserve the fundamental rights of women and children to be empowered and protected.
So it's a direct philosophical line from the girl who got fired for making romance novel heroines independent
to the global author using her platform to fight for the independence and safety of women worldwide.
And the foundation's ethos is distilled into Paula's own personal motto,
which was, what is the most generous thing to do? That beautiful, simple, powerful question guides the Foundation's decisions, ensuring that Paula's brief life continues to resonate as a powerful force for global good and empowerment. It transforms personal tragedy into enduring philanthropy.
Before we wrap up, let's quickly trace her personal life changes, which reflect her evolution and movements across continents.
She married Miguel Frias in 1962. This was a foundational marriage that produced her two children, Paula and Nicholas, and it lasted until 1987, spanning her life in Chile and the early years of exile in Venezuela.
And her move to the U.S. brought a new relationship.
Yes. While on a book tour in California, she met William C. Gordon, who was a California attorney and novelist. She married him in 1988, and that marriage lasted until 2015.
And more recently.
In 2019, she married Roger Kukris, a New York lawyer, with whom she currently resides in California.
Finally, as required by our sources, we must report on her stated political views, maintaining our impartial stance. I mean, her political background makes it impossible for her to remain silent on these matters.
That's absolutely true. Her life was forged in political fire, and she remains politically engaged. She publicly expressed deep contempt for Donald Trump and his policies following the 2016 election.
She also actively endorsed Joe Biden in 2020.
Yes. And crucially, she uses her platform consistently to defend the political and social record of her cousin, Salvador Allende, ensuring that the legacy of the democratically elected socialist leader is not forgotten in the face of Pinochet's history. Her politics are not separate from her art. They are the very air it breathes.
So as we synthesize this deep dive for you, what defines the extraordinary narrative of Isabel Allende? We've seen a life of constant upheaval, from the global flux of a diplomatic childhood to the definitive traumatic rupture of political exile,
which she then transformed into a moment of necessary personal liberation.
We've established how she used the discipline of her journalism and the trauma of her exile to create this world-straddling, massive literary empire. She effectively transformed profound personal and political pain into universally resonant narratives of family, history, and the fantastic.
Right. Exile didn't just motivate her. It provided the social freedom and the critical distance she needed to find her serious voice.
And despite the fierce intellectual condemnation critics who confused popularity with artistic shallowness, who labeled her a hack, she sustained phenomenal commercial success,
while establishing an even deeper, more meaningful philanthropic legacy in her daughter Paula's name, dedicated to the empowerment and protection of women and children globally.
Her career challenges the core assumptions of the literary establishment. It suggests that a writer can be structurally rigorous, politically charged, emotionally accessible, and financially successful all at once.
She is the ultimate exemplar of the learner, adapting, absorbing, and transforming every challenge into a chapter of her next story.
And that circle brings us back to our final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. We began by recalling that Isabel Allende was fired from her first writing job, translating romance novels, because she made the heroines more intelligent and independent. Given that her novels, translated into 42 languages and selling 77 million copies, are consistently centered on women contesting patriarchal ideals, and given that her foundation is dedicated to female empowerment. What does her sustained, phenomenal commercial success tell us about the global readership's quiet, enduring hunger for narratives centered on female liberation?
It seems the world was waiting for the stories the intellectuals dismissed.
The universal success of the intelligent heroine. A truly provocative thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary life of Isabel Allende.
Until next time.
Stay curious.